This week on Government Matters.
What the government is trying to do, what OMB and the Office of Federal Procurement Policy is trying to do is really drive agencies to take advantage of the volume that the government has.
First, it applied to laptops and desktops. Now, the Obama administration will consider category management for mobile devices. We get the details.
So just creating a new agency is not going to solve that problem. That problem is going to be with us, like I said, for decades.
In the wake of the OPM data breach, a new government office. We discuss the prospects for the National Background Investigations Bureau.
You figure you pay somebody to work 250 days a year. For every day they don't work, you're losing that value.
The blizzard of 2016 dumped tons of snow on Metro D.C. Did telework make the region more productive 6 years after Snowmageddon? Government Matters starts right now.
From ABC 7 and News Channel 8, this is Government Matters.
To our viewers around the world on the American Forces Network and here in the nation's capital, thanks for joining us. Government is the engine that runs this city. That's why Government Matters. Every week we'll bring you the top headlines in tech, security, and management. I'm your host, Morris Jones. Every year, the vehicles we drive get more connected. They can navigate us from point A to point B, park themselves, or interact with the road around them. Those advances in technology come with a host of concerns about safety, privacy, and cybersecurity. Government will shape the future of connected and autonomous vehicles, as Diane Cho reports.
It's the only auto show in the United States where buyers for the General Services Administration attend for training and education.
Our show is known as the Public Policy Auto Show on the global circuit, as well as here in the U.S. So we want to display the latest technology.
The Washington Auto Show caters to those decision makers. After all, regulatory agencies decide what manufacturers can put on the road and what they can't.
For example, Secretary Moniz from the Department of Energy came and he wanted to see some of the hydrogen fuel cell technology. Others, like Senator Thune, are interested in safety advancements. So it's a little bit of everything.
And there's plenty to examine. This year, the show features more than 750 vehicles from 41 manufacturers.
So in the back here, we have 2 carbon fiber reinforced hydrogen tanks that store the hydrogen. In the center, we have a fuel cell stack. That's where all the magic happens.
The Mirai from Toyota is a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle.
The hydrogen creates its own electricity when the stored hydrogen in the vehicle combines and has a chemical reaction with oxygen from the atmosphere. So hydrogen and oxygen have that chemical reaction. It produces an electric current. That electric current powers the motor, and then water is the end result.
Toyota is expected to increase production of its hydrogen fuel cell vehicles to 30,000 in the next 4 years, but the problem some consumers might face in the future is trying to find one of these, which is a hydrogen refueling station. According to the U.S. Department of Energy, there are only 14 hydrogen fueling stations in the U.S., not including private stations.
We're not able to have the vehicle on the market unless we actually have the stations on the road first. So the state of California has set aside $200 million to build over 100 fueling stations over the next several years. And Toyota is actually funding the infrastructure in the Northeast states in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts.
The show features the latest technology in auto manufacturing, but it also comes with a host of concerns. Connected cars raise questions about cybersecurity, mobility, and the privacy of drivers' data.
Audi's Q7 was really the star of the show this year, the connected car convoy. They have technology right now ready to be deployed that allows a driver to know when the stoplights in a city will change. So it'll actually even turn the car off in some circumstances, so before it turns it back on for the car to proceed. So that's going to reduce congestion. That's going to give everybody better gas mileage. That's going to limit emissions.
Chevrolet's Bolt EV, which is expected to be out on the roads this fall, is targeting the masses. Its electric vehicle has a range of 200 miles and a retail price of nearly $40,000.
We do have safety features that help you with your driving, whether it be lane keep assist, where it sees the lines in the road in front of you, and if you do not respond to the warning signals, it'll pull you back into your lane if you didn't intend to do that. As well as it can apply last-second braking if you're going at slower speeds and it sees a pedestrian screen in front of you.
Cutting-edge technology that could shape how government builds and regulates the auto fleet of the future. For Government Matters, I'm Diane Cho.
In Tech Matters, applying category management to mobile devices. Last October, the Obama administration banned agencies from opening new contracts for desktops and laptops. They named 3 government-wide acquisition contracts, or GWACs, as the main source for that kind of hardware. Now, the Office of Management and Budget is considering taking that formula and applying it to mobile devices. Joining me with the latest is Jason Miller, Executive Editor at Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Jason, before we get to mobile devices, let's talk about laptops and desktops. Do we have any evidence that the ban on new contracts in that arena resulted in cost savings or other improvements?
You know, it's hard to say right now. It's only been a few months. I think what we're going to see is in 3 to 6 more months, we'll get a better idea of that contract. Let me tell you this, Morris, when I talk with federal chief information officers, and I do every week, what I hear from them is they are excited about it. They do see at least the potential of a contract or this set of contracts to really reduce the costs for their infrastructure. And in fact, many CIOs tell me they just want to get out of managing that infrastructure altogether. So I think that it's going to take a little time for that specific on laptops and desktops.
Now, you got your hands on a draft policy. It details how OMB wants to apply a similar formula to mobile devices. Tell us more.
Well, this is an interesting policy because, again, it's just in draft, so let's be clear, so it could change. But what the draft policy says as of now is agencies are going to be required to do several things. First of all, they're going to have to collect some data about the current set of mobile devices, mobile services, and we're talking about smartphones, tablets, anything that you or me maybe would buy for our families, that agencies buy for their employees, how much they're using it, and then what they're spending on it. And all that data is going to get put into a data collection tool, which then will be put on the acquisition gateway that GSA runs. Now, once that data is up there, agencies then will develop a transition plan, according to the draft policy, to move off of their current set of contracts and to the government-wide contract that GSA runs under the Strategic Sourcing Initiative, and then they'll be told to use that contract and only that contract. Now, there is, of course, the justification of says, well, if you can't use this contract, you must justify why. But for the most part, again, very similar to the laptop desktop one, they have to use that contract. And then finally, what's very interesting about this draft policy is it calls for a pilot program for small agencies who would kind of pool all the minutes together and then buy from that pool or pull from that pool, and GSA would run that pilot program. I think that's one of the most interesting things.
Now, this also is interesting. I think I know the answer, but why does this policy encourage agencies to purchase devices at least one generation behind the latest model? What's the logic there?
I think there's 2 reasons. The first is a cost factor. Obviously, if you're buying an iPhone 5 instead of an iPhone 6, it's cheaper. The second reason I think is a security issue to some extent. Obviously, cybersecurity is one of those topics we always have to talk about. But long story short is the last generation devices, they know more about them, know more about the operating system, understand maybe how to secure them better. So I think cost is a big factor, security is a secondary one.
Now, Jason, FATAR, the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act, gave CIOs purchasing power over technology in their agencies. CIOs considered that a big win. I'm curious, how do they view these blanket prohibitions? To the casual observer like me, they seem to be at odds with one another.
Well, what the government is trying to do, what OMB and the Office of Federal Procurement Policy is trying to do is really drive agencies to take advantage of the volume that the government has. When you're talking about millions of minutes, think about the discount they could get from Verizon or AT&T or any of the carriers, and there's nothing, really what FATAR is doing is building upon this idea of category management, this idea of volume buying, because it's telling the CIOs, hey, work with chief acquisition officers, work with chief financial officers, and come together to say, how can we buy as a enterprise? How can we buy as an organization instead of my office buys and your office buys and someone else's office buys and we're not coordinated? So I think it fits directly with FATAR.
So as you've talked about in the end, Jason, it's all about leveraging the federal government's substantial buying power. Initially, small contractors were concerned that this shift would leave them at a big disadvantage. Is that still the case?
It's hard to tell right now. I mean, the contracts that GSA is pushing for is really held by, the big carriers, the AT&Ts, the Verizons, the CenturyLinks. But the small carriers can come in and offer services and do other things. So it's, I think, a bit early to tell right now what the impact will be. Now, when you talk about hardware and laptops and desktops, I think the small vendor has a big play in that, because you still have a lot of these contractors who offer services and what they call value-added resellers, who maybe will take a Dell laptop and put services on top of it. And I think that plays into those big government-wide acquisition contracts like NASA Soup.
Jason Miller, executive editor at Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. See you next time, Jason.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at names making news. Lockheed Martin will sell part of its IT shop to Leidos for $5 billion. The deal is expected to close at the end of the year. It will make Leidos the nation's largest government services provider and allow Lockheed to focus on its core products. Dr. Anthony Fauci says he doubts the U.S. is vulnerable to a widespread outbreak of the Zika virus. He heads the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Fauci and other federal health officials met with President Obama at the White House this week. The Zika virus is linked to a wave of birth defects in Brazil. FedScoop reports the White House just named 11 people to the latest class of Presidential Innovation Fellows. The list includes Amy Wilson of Booz Allen Hamilton, Adam Bello of EduClipper, and Wendy Harmon of the American Red Cross. We'll turn from tech to security straight ahead on Government Matters. The Office of Personnel Management wants to turn over the federal security clearance process to a new office. We profile the National Background Investigations Bureau next. In Security Matters, overhauling the federal security clearance process. This month, the Office of Personnel Management announced it will step aside and establish the National Background Investigations Bureau. The NBIB will be a new federal office under the Department of Defense. For more, I'm joined by Dan Verton, executive editor at MeriTalk. Dan, before we look ahead, let's look back at the impetus for this new entity. Why did OPM create the NBIB?
Well, it really had no choice, Morris. As we all know now, more than 21 million background investigations were compromised at OPM, likely by Chinese hackers and potentially by several other foreign intelligence services. And quite frankly, the IT infrastructure at OPM and the agency itself just didn't have the resources, the technical expertise, the cybersecurity capabilities to protect that type of information.
All right, so how will this office work and who's in charge?
So the president will establish or appoint rather the head of this new agency. The new agency head will still report to the director of OPM, and the existing infrastructure at OPM in terms of the personnel that they have to do the background investigations will likely just shift over into the new authorities under this new agency. What you will have that's different here, however, is that the actual systems, the databases, and the protection of this information will now shift from OPM to the Department of Defense, which has at its resources in terms of cybersecurity expertise, the likes of the NSA and other experts.
Now, from a staffing and budgetary standpoint, what does the Obama administration need from Congress to create the NBIB, and are they likely to get it?
Well, from what I understand, they're probably going to ask for on the order of $100 million to help stand this thing up, and I think if you look at the situation, they're probably going to get it. Now, there is some pushback coming from Congress in terms of whether or not this is really necessary to create a new bureaucracy, but in all likelihood, they will get the resources they need to stand up this new organization.
Now, I've got more on that right now. House Oversight and Government Reform Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz criticized the move. He says simply creating a new government entity doesn't solve the problem. Does he have a point?
He does have a point. You know, I'm unclear as to what this will actually do in terms of protecting the information. The information that we're concerned about is already gone. The real issue here, the real security problem here is that the most sensitive information that, from a counterintelligence perspective, that we're concerned about is already out. This is a 30, 40, 50-year problem for U.S. intelligence in terms of the counterintelligence threat stemming from the loss of this data. So just creating a new agency is not going to solve that problem. That problem is going to be with us, like I said, for decades. There is a legitimate concern, I think, here that all we're doing is really creating window dressing on this problem. So it will really, I think, fall to the Defense Department to come up with a new plan and a new IT infrastructure and architecture to really protect the information going into this system from this point forward.
Got a good point. Dan, before you go, I'd like to talk about another report from your team at MeriTalk. It's generating some buzz. FedRAMP Fast Forward suggests the government's cloud certification process costs too much money, takes too much time, and needs a major facelift. Explain.
That's correct, Morris. We just released a report called Fix FedRAMP. It's a six-step report on the FedRAMP process. And as your viewers probably know, the FedRAMP process is the security certification process that cloud service providers must go through in order to sell their products and services to the federal government. The problem is that the program is now in its fifth year, and it's suffering from some significant problems in terms of transparency, in terms of the cost and time it takes for vendors to get through the process. And the problems are significant enough that there's a real possibility that FedRAMP may actually be on a road to failure if these issues are not addressed by the administration. We have a major event coming up on March 3rd where we're going to discuss this event on Capitol Hill, this paper on Capitol Hill, and we're going to try to get the General Services Administration, the FedRAMP Program Office, to actually address these recommendations, which is the result of 7 months of work by cloud service providers themselves, government agency executives, and some of the third-party assessment organizations that actually do the security certifications for the government on these vendor products and services. So everyone's invested in this. Everyone has an interest in seeing this program succeed, and that's the goal of this paper, is to identify some of these very serious problems moving forward and try to come up with a roadmap for fixing it, so that this is a very important program for the government in terms of cybersecurity, and to make sure this program ultimately succeeds.
And we will follow up with you in March. Dan Verton, Executive Editor at MeriTalk. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Morris.
We'll turn from security to management straight ahead on Government Matters. The blizzard of 2016 brought Washington, D.C. to its knees. Metro closed and buses stopped running. Did the storm have a chilling effect on productivity? We talk telework next. In Management Matters, the new reality for federal workers on snow days. In 2010, Washington was pummeled by a series of storms that dropped a record amount of snow over a 9-day period. That blizzard earned the nickname Snowmageddon. Last Friday, the 22nd, another blizzard rolled into D.C. and dumped between 18 and 38 inches of snow over a 3-day period. The blizzard shuttered federal offices on Monday and Tuesday and prompted shorter hours on 3 additional days. But that didn't mean feds were not working. Here with an update is Kate Lister, president of Global Workplace Analytics. She joins us via Skype from Carlsbad, California. Kate, it must be nice to talk about historic blizzards from coastal California. How's the weather out there?
Oh, I don't like to rub it in. 75 and sunny, but there's a cool breeze off the ocean.
All right, I think it's best we move on then. Before the blizzard of 2016 hit Metro Washington, you put out a press release. It said a single snow day can cost Northeast region employers more than $1.3 billion in lost productivity. Tell us more.
And that's not even the productivity. That's just the salary portion.
Wow.
You figure you pay somebody to work 250 days a year. For every day they don't work, you're losing that value.
Not only that, but if this were to continue as it has in the past, when we've had blizzard after blizzard, this can affect the whole economic livelihood of the whole, GDP and the U.S. economy for a while. Now,
Absolutely.
You find that 60% of employers in the Northeast region allow workplace flexibility for some employees. Is that figure different in D.C.?
It's not so much the question of what they allow. 60% allow it, but it's a very, very, very small portion that actually use it. In fact, only about 2.8% of the U.S. population works at home half-time or more.
Now, OPM gives most federal workers the option of taking administrative leave or teleworking. Does Uncle Sam do a better job in this arena than most employers?
They've been doing it longer, for more than 4 decades. It's been emphasis in the government for continuity of operations. And then the Telework Enhancement Act of 2010 put an additional push on. I think they are more prepared, and I think that the Telework program has certainly made them more prepared and more able to handle these kinds of disasters. Otherwise, the federal government will be losing all kinds of money. Our estimates show it's about $66 million a day for federal workers.
How do you convince cynics that teleworking actually does what it's supposed to, that somebody's not sitting there with their cat watching TV and with some Fritos in their hand? How do you know it's productive?
Well, it's interesting, Morris. How do you know it's productive when they're at the office?
Good point.
The highest viewership of Crazy Cats videos is during working hours.
That's
so
right.
Looking at the back of their head doesn't tell you anything. I love a line that Sharon Wall, GSA administrator, said a few years back. Telework doesn't create management problems, it reveals them. You've got to be managing by results, not by backs of heads.
Very good point. Earlier I mentioned Snowmageddon, the historic storm in February of 2010. Give us a sense of how things have changed over the past 6 years. Are more people more productive during snow days? And how far does D.C. and the federal government have to go?
Certainly more people are. Certainly the Telework Enhancement Act of 2010 has put a push on this, but it's not just for continuity of operations. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Our estimates show that an employer can save about $10,000 per employee per year for every half-time teleworker. And a big part of that savings comes from additional productivity and reduced real estate costs. So we're coming along with the technology. More people are doing it. You see them working anywhere. But we have to catch up a little bit in terms of the rules and regulations around it.
You talk about technology. We could not be doing this if it weren't for broadband. I mean, 10, 20 years ago, you couldn't just use a dial-up modem and expect to be working efficiently from home.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. All right, well, enjoy the 70s out there as we dig out from the snow. I know that spring is on the way. Kate Lister, president of Global Workplace Analytics. Thanks again, Kate.
Thanks, Mars.
And that's the latest from Washington. Thanks for being with us. I'm Morris Jones. We know your week is filled with other matters. Save this half hour for us.